The people ask me, are we going to have a recession? And my answer is we might be in a recession right now and not even know it. We could be facing a global recession, including China, but just focusing on the U.S. Because that's the Fed's sort of territory. So Powell saying, the economy is great is nonsense. What he said, by the end of the year, we could be looking at 4.2% unemployment, 3.5 to 4% interest rates, and, kind of 2.7% inflation. You're like, wait a second, inflation is 8.6 today. How do you get to, 2.7, number one? And then what about rising unemployment and higher interest rates? How do you reconcile those things? He said all three of those things. But what state of the world could make those things come true? There's only one, which is a recession. A recession would do it. A recession will raise unemployment. Higher interest rates will cause the recession. And the recession will cause inflation to go down. So in effect, Powell was saying we're going to have a recession. Inflation, prices go up, so we understand that, or maybe put differently, the value of your money goes down. You don't get as much for your money, same thing. But inflation, broadly speaking, has two causes. One is called, not to get too technical, but it's called cost push. This comes from the supply side. So there's a shortage of oil, and we've got a financial and economic war going on between Russia and the United States. The U.S. really started, but U.S., EU, Canada, Australia, Japan versus Russia. That's obviously disrupting supply chain, cutting down energy supply, causing the price of oil to go up, et cetera. So that's coming from the supply side. And you're exactly right. The Fed can't drill for oil. The Fed can't plant wheat. The Fed can't make semiconductors. So they can't do anything about this. And the supply chains are breaking down. They were breaking down before the war in Ukraine, but Ukraine has made it worse. The other source of inflation is called demand pull. And this is when individuals, you, me, and all of our viewers and, everyday Canadians and Americans worry about inflation. We say, well, I'm just thinking about buying a refrigerator. Better buy it now before the price goes up, or the car, house, or whatever it might be. They're different, but they affect each other. When the cost push inflation from the supply side has enough effect, there's a tipping point or critical threshold in psychology. We say, maybe it is out of control. I better go buy some stuff. Then the velocity of money goes up, and then you get inflation. So the Fed can't do anything about cost push. They can't do anything about the price of oil, and you're right about that. But they're looking at the demand side, saying, hey, if this supply thing goes on long enough, eventually the psychology will change, and we'll get demand pull and behavioral, and that is really hard to change. So what they're trying to do, they know they can't change the supply side, but they're trying to squash the demand side before it gets out of control. Now, the question, of course, is can they do it? The answer is they can do it, but at what cost? So a general rule of thumb, this is really simple. You have to forget about nominal interest rates. Nominal interest rates are the rates you see on your screen, you hear about in the headlines and all that. Real interest rates are nominal interest rates minus inflation. Take the inflation out and see what's left. Well, right now, real interest rates are about 2%, actually 1.75% under the Fed's policy rate. Inflation's 8.6%. So, just round numbers, 1.5 minus 8.5, that makes the inflation rate -7. That's nowhere near. It's got to be +2. Real rates have to be +2 to squash inflation. Right now, they're -7. So that implies that the Fed has to raise interest rates to 10.5% to get to +2 real interest rates. That's never going to happen. They're never going to get there. They will destroy the economy long before they get there. So the Fed has no hope of squashing inflation from the demand side, as you described, by raising rates, unless inflation comes down for other reasons. So what they're going to do, they're going to keep raising rates, 2, 2.5, 3, 3.5, 4, hope that inflation comes down from 8 to maybe 3, although I think that's a stretch. You could get into positive real rate territory, but they're really far away from it. So I think, by the way, I described what they're trying to do. I should make it clear they're going to fail. The only way inflation comes down, the way we're talking about, is if they trash the economy, a severe recession. If that happens, you say, well, do people still need to put gas in their cars? Well, you're right, but not if they're unemployed, because they're not going to work. There's a lot here that's just for show. It sounds good on TV, but there's a lot less here than meets the eye. But the point is, this is not over anytime soon. And even if it were, when you break supply chains, you can't just put them back together. It's like breaking a vase. in 1,000 pieces. And you got to go buy a new vase. It's going to take years to undo this damage. So I spoke to the individual who was probably the single individual most responsible for building the modern supply chain. It was 30 years from 1989 to 2019. It was head of one of the largest companies in the world, and this is what they did, among other things. And he said, Jim, you have to understand, it took us 30 years to build it. It took us 3 years to blow it up. It's not going to come back in a year. This is going to take 5, 10, 15 years to build a new one. So it's what I call supply chain 2.0. Well, buying a refrigerator is a good idea. Buying a freezer might be a better idea. We're looking for food shortages by the fall. Now, when I say food shortages, in Africa and Middle East, this will mean mass starvation. You may see the greatest humanitarian crisis in history because they literally can't get the food. Everyone's like, well, gee, you can't get Ukrainian wheat. What's the big deal? Buy it from somewhere else. There is nowhere else. Canada and the United States grow an enormous amount of wheat, but we use most of it internally, and we feed, because it's not for humans, by the way. We feed our animals. This is how you feed cows, pigs. This is how you get beef and pork. This is an example of the supply chain, how it filters all the way through. So you would expect higher prices to persist. You would expect food shortages. Buying a freezer is not a bad idea. The future supply chain is going to be it goes by different names. Janet Yellen calls it friendshoring. Macron calls it constellation. I call it a college of nations, but basically we'll have supply chains and trade, but it'll be sort of members only. So US, Canada, Australia, Europe, others, Japan, will be invited to join, but not China. Russia is going to be in the waiting room for a while. We should be better allies of Russia, but the Democrats in the United States have pretty much made that impossible, at least for the short run. And then there'll be other countries that are kind of neutral in that scheme, Brazil, India, and others. But the point is you'll still have trade and you'll have supply chains, but it'll be kind of friendly countries, members only, and exclude China. So that decoupling is going to go ahead. The Chinese seem to be not only fine with it, but they're actually leading the way. Semiconductor manufacturing is moving back to the United States. The 20 billion of new semiconductor plants from Intel. And why is Taiwan Semiconductor spending over $5 billion to build new semiconductor fabrication plants in the United States? Well, obviously because they're worried about China. We're reshuffling the deck, but none of this stuff is easy. Semiconductor plants take 5 years to build. A new refinery, forget it. That's like 7 to 10 years. We haven't had one in the United States since 1977. So it's going to take a while to do all this. Well, we can do it. So if I said we're definitely going to have inflation, you would know what to do. You'd buy gold, hard assets, land, silver, treasury notes, government bonds, etc. If I said we're definitely going to have deflation, you would also know what to do. You would reduce leverage. You would have more cash, and there are other assets you could go into. The problem is we could have both. There's no question we have inflation right now. It's front and center. But if the Fed squashes it and causes a recession or worse, you could flip to deflation very quickly. So this is going to sound like an obvious statement. What you want is diversification. Sounds obvious, but most people don't know what diversification is. I see people, I've got 50 stocks in 10 different sectors. I'm highly diversified. I'm like, no, you're not. You have one asset class called stocks. Real diversification, have a slice of stocks, gold, real estate, cash. Agriculture is a good investment. Energy, forget the Green New Scam. That's a joke. Oil and natural gas are going to be around for a long time.